Member, you have 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I would ask if I be given a signal at about 10 minutes to go, please. Thank you. Mr. Deputy Speaker, honorable members, I came here today having been alerted by the Leader of the House with a prepared written speech. And I've sat and listened to members on the other side on what I consider to be a very important debate about a very centrally important subject. And I was very deeply saddened. Deeply saddened, so saddened that I was tempted to depart from that which I had prepared and to speak from the heart. I will speak from the heart, but I will not abandon that which I have prepared. May I say, first of all, thank you to the Honourable Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley, once more for the signal opportunity that I have been given. And I thank him in specific regard to the fact that I am a Caribbean person and a little later I will invite the member from Naparimo to visit a particular street, but I'll come to that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this bill, the Immigration Caribbean Community Skilled Nationals Bill 2022, is a very important bill which is part of our history going back to even before 1973, which is the date of the coming into being of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. And we have moved a long way from the 1973 revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. Permit me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to quote some of the more pertinent portions of CARICOM's mission statement to underscore the point that there is a further obligation on all of us in Trinidad and Tobago and in every CARICOM country to promote and realize the ideals of regional ease of movement and employment, and with his leave, to borrow the words of the Honourable Senator Dr. Amery Browne, what ought to be properly called legal and orderly regional migration. They are to affirm the collective identity and facilitate social cohesion of the people of the community. To realize our human potential as defined by the ideal Caribbean person, full employment and full enjoyment of human rights. To systematically reduce poverty, unemployment, and social exclusion and their impacts. To increase savings and the flow of investment opportunity within the community. Those are four of the most important pillars of CARICOM and its mission statement, a community to which Trinidad and Tobago belongs and which Trinidad and Tobago, under the People's National Movement, embraces. Along with those four CARICOM pillars of economic integration, foreign policy coordination, human and social development, and security, these all align seamlessly with the global perspectives on integration, communication, and respect for the individual. Trinidad and Tobago is cognizant of CARICOM's mission and how its pillars interplay with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and our development of our own National Development Strategy as outlined in the Vision 2030 development document. Goal 8, the promotion of sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth. Goal 10, the reduction of inequality among countries, among other goals, are all relevant to this discussion today before this Honourable House. In essence, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this bill transcends into a domestic, regional, and international conversation of which we are proud to be part. This bill seeks to give further viability to community law and to this government's obligations to incorporate and protect community rights through our local legislation, all while simultaneously aligning this region and Trinidad and Tobago with accepted international law and principles of reciprocity and good faith. Reciprocity, one doesn't need to go to the dictionary, simply means it works both ways. So if I were to digress from my prepared speech for a moment, if you will permit me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was alarmed to listen to the member for Naparima because he seemed to be talking about a one-way street. He seemed not to have read this bill which we are debating. And he seemed to be concerned in a condition of xenophobia about, and he used the words, he referred to our CARICOM brothers and sisters as foreigners. He spoke about the influx.
Please, members.
He spoke about border control, all with the intention of sending out, with the greatest of respect, I understood him to be sending out alarm bells to our national community to suggest that our CARICOM brothers and sisters in the influx, the one-way street that this bill will allow, would be threatening the people of this country. And that is an egregious, false, and dangerous premise, Mr. Deputy Speaker. If I may return to my written speech, the background and objectives of this bill, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This government, in furthering its CSME and CARICOM obligations, has been very committed to its regional integration movement. This movement is one which has evolved over the course of our collective history. It should be noted that freedom of movement is one of the objectives of the CSME and an integral aspect of this government's post-COVID-19 plan for economic recovery. At the 27th regular meeting of the Conference of Heads of Government of CARICOM in July 2006 and at the 18th intersessional meeting of CARICOM heads in February 2007, it was agreed that the list of categories of persons eligible for free movement be expanded from 5 to 10. For this decision to be implemented and for persons to be able to apply for the required skills certificate, the necessary legislative amendments would need to be made in Trinidad and Tobago and elsewhere. It's not about a one-way street into Trinidad and Tobago. It is about the reciprocal free movement of CARICOM nationals within our Caribbean space for the opportunities of growth, for the opportunities of jobs, for the opportunities of movement of capital, for the opportunity of family. How many of us have brothers and sisters, wives and children born of our relationships with brothers and sisters from outside of Trinidad and Tobago? That is why I say that the integration movement that CARICOM represents, the free movement of peoples, which this bill is about and is seeking to make for an orderly regulatory framework for, existed particularly in Trinidad and Tobago long before the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas came into existence in 1973. So to raise this xenophobic cry of doom and gloom to suggest that Trinbagonians must somehow or the other be frightened by this specter of being put out of jobs, invaded by criminals and other persons, is to deny the very essence of who we are as Trinbagonians. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Immigration Caribbean Community Skilled Nationals Act, Chapter 1803, has undergone several amendments. And we have evolved even beyond the 1973 revised treaty. We remember that the original treaty, Article 38, had expressly restricted the freedom of movement. Article 38 had said, nothing in this treaty shall be construed as requiring or imposing any obligation on a member state to grant freedom of movement to persons into its territory, whether or not such persons are nationals of other member states of the Caribbean Common Market. That was the 1973 revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, Article 38. We have moved beyond that. The revisions to the treaty signal a deliberate exercise to move away from those original restrictive articles. And this was envisioned to incorporate the free movement of skilled workers, capital, goods, and services across all CARICOM member states. As it pertains to free movement of skilled persons, the original category of persons contained in the Act has since evolved to keep abreast of the ever-expanding skill set of CARICOM nationals, from professionals such as nurses and teachers, to include a variety of skilled workers, including agricultural, vocational, and artisans. This bill and its previous amendments all work to enshrine Trinidad and Tobago's obligations under the revised treaties. It aims to establish conditions, Mr. Deputy Speaker, which would facilitate access by our nationals to the collective resources of the region on a non-discriminatory basis. This bill is providing a legislative framework to enable us to cohere and to coexist with the legislative framework that exists within our other CARICOM brothers and sisters nations, to enable our people to go out to take advantage of the opportunities that exist out within the Caribbean space, in addition to allowing persons to come into Trinidad and Tobago. It is about our recognition of our reciprocal rights, our reciprocal bondage, our reciprocal obligations, and our reciprocal familial community relationship with our CARICOM brothers and sisters. It is not about criminals, influx, and foreigners coming into Trinidad, and I abhor that approach. And it is not enough, may it please you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to say, I support the idea, while at the same time cynically using cosmetic language, I support the idea, and to denounce the substance behind the idea. We must walk the talk, not walk the walk, not talk the talk. We must mean what we say, and we must live by what we mean.
Member, please. It reached my ear. Could you just retract, please?
Of course, I retract the comment of Marie Le Pen.
Proceed.
If I may, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the issue of access to resources on a non-discriminatory basis is fundamental to the spirit of the treaty and the concept of free movement. It is an issue which has engaged that most important of our regional courts, the Caribbean Court of Justice in its original jurisdiction, and which has provided illuminating judgments on this quintessential Caribbean issue, which no other court, and certainly not the Privy Council, can address as definitively as it has. And I'm going to trouble us with a little bit of the history of the judgments, a few of them of this court, so as to assist the learned and honorable member for Naparima to appreciate that that court exists, and he should read their judgments before he speaks about the influx, the xenophobic influx of foreigners into Trinidad and Tobago. It doesn't surprise me that the honorable member is as narrow as he is in his opposition to the bill, notwithstanding the fact that he supports the idea. Because in that other place, I have heard those equally narrow arguments against the idea of the Caribbean Court of Justice becoming our apex court. It's not the right time, is the mantra. Well, it will never be the right time, because the right time is now. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the concept of Caribbean community speaks to our history, our present, and our destiny. It speaks to who we are. If I can trouble this House with a little reference to one of the decisions of the Caribbean Court of Justice to help us to appreciate what free movement across the Caribbean is all about. The Shannick-Myrie decision of 2013 of the Caribbean Court of Justice in its original jurisdiction. And may I assist the member for Naparima to appreciate that that court has two jurisdictions. An original jurisdiction which gives it the jurisdiction to interpret and pronounce on the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas and the provisions as though that treaty binds us all as members of CARICOM. And there is the appellate jurisdiction, which we have not yet acceded to in breach of the treaty which we signed when Mr. Pandey signed on to the agreement. Shannick-Myrie was a dispute, Mr. Deputy Speaker, brought by a Jamaican national who had entered Barbados. She was subjected by border officials in Barbados to very serious breaches of her right to free movement under Article 45 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas and the decision of the Conference Heads of Government at their 28th meeting. She was subjected to body cavity searches by the immigration officials of Barbados. She was singled out and treated less favorably than other nationals based on the fact that she was a Jamaican. The xenophobia that we have heard about today was being visited on this young lady from Jamaica by Barbadian immigration officials. And she went to court, the Caribbean Court of Justice, to ask for a vindication of her most fundamental Caribbean right, that is to say, the right of freedom of movement across this Caribbean space. And this is one of the many things that the Caribbean Court of Justice said. It explained that the right of definite entry conferred by the 2000 conference decisions entails the right of community nationals to have unrestricted access to and movement within the jurisdiction of the member states, subject to public interest considerations. So if the member had taken a little time to remind himself of the existence of the Caribbean Court of Justice and that decision, he would know not only that we have a court that affirms the legislative intention that we are seeking for this House to pass, but he would also appreciate that it's not a free-for-all. When he said, what are the border controls? He spoke of his fears of criminals coming in here. He asked, what is the jurisdiction of the CSME registrar to manage people when they arrive here? He would appreciate, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the language of the Caribbean Court of Justice reminds us that not only with respect to skilled movement of nationals across the Caribbean do we have the CSME register, but we also have the courts of this country, that is to say, Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean Court of Justice, that will regulate those rights. There is another case that has come out of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I would wish to remind the member for Naparima of, because he might have thought, although he didn't articulate it, that in the influx of the criminals and other persons who would come here to deprive us of our legitimate space, he might have thought, well, also we should keep homosexuals out of Trinidad and Tobago. There is the case of Tomlinson, which went to the Caribbean Court of Justice. And Tomlinson is a very significant decision, because what the Caribbean Court of Justice has told us, and the state of Trinidad and Tobago has affirmed, is in spite of the fact that Section 8 of the Immigration Act of this country proscribes the entry of homosexuals and persons who live off their means, the court affirmed Mr. Tomlinson's right as a homosexual to enter Trinidad and Tobago, and to its credit, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, which was a party to the action, did not resist the right of Mr. Tomlinson, a homosexual, notwithstanding the provisions of Section 8 of the Immigration Act, freely to enter Trinidad and Tobago because he posed no serious threat, public interest threat to anyone in this country. And the regulatory framework is already prescribed for, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the legislation which we are asking this court, this Honourable House, to pass here. So we are reminded, with respect to Clause 7 of the bill, that Clause 7 will repeal parts of Section 5, and in that repeal it says that the minister with responsibility for immigration may revoke the permission granted under this act where that person is the subject of a deportation order, or where that person is deemed to be a threat to national security, or where that person poses a serious public health threat in Trinidad and Tobago. So the regulatory control and monitoring is prescribed for in this very bill that we are seeking to pass here today without the need for unnecessary xenophobic fears. Mr. Deputy Speaker, our CARICOM reality reminds us that the CSME regime is an arrangement among 12 CARICOM member states. The purpose of creating the CSME was to generate a single enlarged economic space through the removal of restrictions among the member states, resulting in the free movement of goods, services, persons, capital, and technology among member states on a reciprocal basis, and confers the right of CARICOM nationals to establish a business in any participating CARICOM member state. So we are opening the doors and the windows for citizens of this country to move into the larger space and to take advantage of the opportunities. And the Honourable Prime Minister today, in his response, in his statement, said it far better than I can, so I will not dwell on that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it leaves me, therefore, as I close, to say that on behalf of this government, I am proud to entirely support the vision of this government to promote this particular piece of legislation. We cannot continue to believe, as those on the other side seem to believe, that we can turn our backs on our CARICOM neighbors, the investment opportunities, the trade opportunities, the free movement opportunities that are available to our people, and expect that we will survive in this very difficult world. And may I, with your leave, at the risk of allowing myself to be a little personal, may I pay tribute to one of those Trinidad and Tobago nationals who gave reality to the concept of free movement across the Caribbean, Dr. Reginald F. Armour. who left Princestown, not too far away from Naparima. If the member goes across, he will see the street named Armour Street. Left Princestown and went to Dominica in the 1930s and has left an indelible contribution of this nation of Trinidad and Tobago across Dominica, so much so that there is now a hospital in Dominica named the Dr. Reginald F. Armour Hospital. That is the contribution of skilled movement across the Caribbean nation. Mr. Deputy Speaker, thank you very much.